fossil fuels. You know the drill. They are the main drivers of the global economy.
In the most fundamental way possible, hydrocarbons and their use has undoubtedly improved human welfare enormously.
And at the same time, they're the primary cause of global warming that's dangerously altering the Earth's climate.
The expansion and development of new oil reserves is inconsistent with a safe climate in the future.
The tension between economic and environmental priorities couldn't be clearer than in the fight for and against pipelines.
Biden's decision to revoke a permit for Keystone XL will certainly be a topic of discussion. It marks the end of a saga spanning more than 12 years over the pipeline meant to carry Canadian crude to the United States.
Pipelines have come to symbolize this battle in society between oil and gas development and a switch to controlling climate change towards developing other alternative renewable sources of energy. Pipeline industry is kind of a barometer of where things are going. Has gone from alive to dead to alive to dead again.
It seems likely that the days of these $5 billion plus 1,000-mile-long projects are over.
This is the story of the multi-billion-dollar business built on the back of fossil fuels, and how it too may go the way of the dinosaurs. There's no doubt that oil and gas made the world what it is today. Once reliant on foreign oil predominantly in the Middle East, the U.S. became closer to its perennial quest for energy independence within the last decade with advances in fracking.
About 10 years ago is the start of what we consider the shale revolution, and that's when we combined hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, and we just unleashed this record amount of U.S. oil and gas supply.
The shale revolution has had its own ups and downs, but regardless of fluctuations in supply and demand, we always need to move this stuff around.
To support this massive growth in oil and gas production, you need this suitably large underground network of pipelines to move those products to export terminals, to power plants, to refineries and petrochemical facilities. These are not small ventures. They're thousands of miles long just for one pipeline alone. They cost billions of dollars. They require massive permitting at the federal level.
And so it was that the shale revolution led to a pipeline boom. But that boom ultimately triggered an explosion of lawsuits broadly led by environmentalists. No project embodies the Herculean nature and divisiveness of this business better than the Keystone XL pipeline. The Keystone XL pipeline is like a diagonal line from the middle of Alberta down to Houston, Texas. It cuts through the U.S. states of Montana, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. A project of this scale faces varying permitting systems from state to state, as well as multiple run-ins with a host of conflicting interest groups.
The Keystone XL pipeline embodied a lot of the elements that pipeline opponents hated so much about the industry. It was massive, more than 1,000 miles long. It carried oil from the Alberta oil sands, which a lot of folks call tar sands because it's a particularly heavy grade of crude. It went through private land, indigenous land. It wasn't even carrying American oil and gas. So I think a lot of folks saw it as something that represented everything they hated about the fossil fuel and extraction industries.
This is environmental activist Anthony Swift from the Natural Resources Defense Council. And suffice it to say, he's not a fan of oil pipelines.
Keystone XL was a 830,000 barrel a day tar sands pipeline that would have expanded the dirtiest source of oil in the world for decades to come, a scenario that would have been inconsistent with a safe climate. And in addition to that, it would have had devastating impacts to indigenous communities in Alberta and communities along the route who rely on water sources threatened by the pipeline.
Proposed in 2005, the $5.2 billion project pressed forward with relative ease and with the cooperation of the U.S. government under the Bush administration. This is Dennis McConaughey, a former executive at TC Energy, the pipeline company behind Keystone. As you can imagine, he has some strong opinions about the industry, environmentalists, and the Biden administration.
The regulatory process under the Bush administration for base Keystone went very easily. It was all done within almost 2 years. The United States needed heavy oil. We had it to sell, and we were the pipeline conduit that was going to create this system that would create the greatest transportation economy for Canadian oil sands producers. So rather than sending it out on trains, trucks, this high volume direct link was going to give us the greatest transportation economy. This project became resisted by what I'll say basically the North American environmental movement.
The reality is there is no conceivable way that we can continue to use the same amount of oil we're using today without creating catastrophic climate impacts. The reign of oil has to come to a close if we're going to have a safe climate. And fortunately, we have the replacements and alternatives available today.
Environmental groups did win some victories under the Obama administration, especially when it came to the pipeline battlefront. In 2014, Obama vetoed a bill in favor of moving the pipeline forward. Then the following year, after 6 years of consideration, he decided to reject the project's permit outright.
Because Keystone XL was going to cross the Canadian-US border, it needed special approval from the State Department, which is not something that pipelines that just go from one state to another require here in the US. That gives the White House more power than it would normally to either approve or kill a pipeline project.
The State Department has decided that the Keystone XL pipeline would not serve the national interests of the United States.
Let me just say that life has a way of surprising us.
What a great honor to be able to introduce for the first time ever anywhere the 45th President of the United States of America, Donald J. Trump.
Trump giving them a permit in early 2017.
Keystone Pipeline.
Legal interventions caused that permit to have to be reissued back in 2019. And it took that length of time before TransCanada and its shippers, who had to be reassembled commercially, started to construct the project in 2020.
The pendulum once again swung in the other direction when shortly after his inauguration, President Biden halted the pipeline's Phase 4 construction, which was to cut over 500 miles and run straight through a national landmark area in Nebraska called the Sandhills.
I'm visiting you from wane, Alberta, and until a few days ago, this was kind of ground zero for construction of the Keystone XL pipeline. That all pretty much came to a halt a few days ago.
This was something that was enormously controversial. It had this kind of outsized impact on the way we talk about our energy and climate in the U.S. It was something that he promised to do, and he did it. I think it was seen as kind of an easy way for Biden to quickly deliver on some of his environmental promises, because at the end of the day, this was a pipeline that was not yet built. It is a lot harder to go after something that has 200 miles of steel already in the ground.
Biden's cancellation of the Keystone XL project was, an absolutely necessary decision. It upheld the decision that President Obama made in 2016 after a thorough review, and it just shows that he's serious about transitioning the U.S. to clean energy and really taking a leadership stance on climate change globally.
But focusing their energy on the pipelines is often seen by people in the industry as misdirected activism.
This doesn't stop oil sands production. It doesn't stop Canadians trying to find other ways of getting that oil into the United States, but it does reduce the economic value of having lost the most efficient option that you could have resorted.
When we think about the impact that the Keystone XL pipeline would have had on the oil market, I think is when we start to see even opinions in the energy industry divided. There are signs that there is a shortage of so-called takeaway capacity out of Alberta. However, on the other side, it's not clear that we needed, a pipeline that could shuttle 800,000 barrels a day plus out of Canada. So I think the impact and the fallout from this decision is going to remain to be seen.
A major point that pro-pipeline advocates emphasize is, of course, jobs. And while it's true that killing a pipeline does result in a loss of some work, that might be a rather myopic definition of jobs.
As far as jobs, the industry has said that it would have employed over 10,000 direct jobs. Obviously, that would have a pretty big impact on certain communities and in certain circles where there are a lot of industrial workers. I think it's important to remember that these were not permanent positions. These were mostly construction jobs and pipeline development jobs on the ground. It's a little bit of a more complicated picture than I think the industry has made it sound.
There really are several different economic interests who were impacted by this. So there are the people like TransCanada Energy and their other partners in the pipeline, notably the Alberta government, the province of Alberta. They stand to lose somewhere, my guess would be on the order of $4 billion. All of that is kind of like the sunk cost of just trying to do the project. States that lose some of the economic benefits that derive from the project, such as property tax payments that literally would rank in the billions for states like Montana, South Dakota, Nebraska. Those states would also have benefited from the construction activity that would have occurred in their states that's lost. Tradesmen that had jobs working on this pipeline that don't exist anymore. The American refining interests, who were seeing value in running Canadian crude from a security point of view or from the fact that it just would work better than other sources, whether those were from Venezuela or Mexico.
President Biden's American Jobs Plan has earmarked $174 billion to win the EV market, and another $34 billion for solar, wind, and other alternative energy solutions. If this becomes a reality, the laws of supply and demand may drastically shift away from fossil fuels forever.
Biden's job plan is a really important foundational step in building an economy that's on the basis of clean energy and supports the just transition of workers from efforts to expand oil production, contrary to our health and safety, to projects that allow us to clean it up.
Demand could be nearing a peak, whether it be electrification of vehicles, demand for oil will stop growing, development of resources in the oil sands. The oil here will keep being pumped out, but there won't be as much need to expand oil production in Canada. The demand for new pipelines will be less.
Ultimately, with the complexity of getting these pipelines built and the political maelstroms around them, the pipeline boom may very well turn into a bust.
Fossil fuels are a controversial topic today in the U.S. If you are building a pipeline that shuttles them from one place to another, and you're doing that by claiming eminent domain so that you can take someone else's property, you better be pretty sure that you can do it without getting sued, and that if you are sued, you're successful, because every month that goes by where that project is delayed or there is some other legal development that arises, that's adding cost to your project, and that is the absolute opposite of what these investors want to see. It's just been dramatic how quickly these new projects had to basically stop in the face of all of this environmental opposition. You see companies like Williams who tried to build not one but two gas pipelines in the Northeast and got shut down by the state of New York both times. Energy Transfer with the Dakota Access Pipeline, the Rover Gas Pipeline, both of those encountered tremendous opposition from environmental groups, but even from regulators themselves. Even in Texas, which we never would have expected to see very much opposition here. Kinder Morgan had trouble getting a natural gas pipeline built recently. So I think it's just becoming clear that this is not an industry that's going to be able to just grow and grow and grow like it used to be.
There's still people who think that Keystone XL will be revived, maybe with a new administration. It's a bit uncertain how much need there is for the pipeline. Will there be even the impetus to drive ahead?
It's a pretty clear win for the environmental movement. This is something that they have sought to kill for over a decade now.
The American environmental movement won because it attached itself to the Democratic candidate. That person won. He followed through on his commitment that he would deny this project.
Biden's policy goals are set by an international community that is aligned at maintaining a safe climate. And that means that projects like Keystone XL are simply inconsistent with that goal. The environmental community is aligned with the Biden administration's goal of maintaining a safe climate, and that was what the president was elected to achieve by the American people.
When we look at the pipeline industry as a whole, I think it's a little bit more nuanced. For some companies, Keystone XL being dead actually might save them from some more sweeping environmental regulations that would have impacted their own projects. At the end of the day, I think the fate of the pipeline industry was sealed before Keystone XL. We're probably going to be consuming fewer and fewer barrels of oil, less and less natural gas as we progress through this century. I just don't think anybody, be it investors, green groups, landowners, they want to see another $7-10 billion pipeline. And I think what that means is that for the US, we're done building these mega pipeline projects.